Amen. I feel like we just need to give the Lord a hand this morning. You know, that's how we replace the lies with the truth, is just keep telling ourselves, repeating the truth to ourselves over and over and over, just like Jordan said, till we finally get it. It takes us a long time for it to sink in, for many of us. We're going to close out our Unshakeable sermon series in the book of Daniel today with the story of Daniel in the lion's den. Actually, the picture that we've been showing for the entire series is found in Daniel chapter 6. And as I kind of thought about it this week, I've been preaching for over 20 years now, and I don't think I have ever preached on this passage. And as I kind of thought about that, it was like, well, you know, maybe it's just too familiar, or maybe we think this should be kind of relegated to children's church. You know, this is a children's story. But as I really studied and prepared this week, I came to realize this is not a children's story at all. All right, and there is a lot that God, I feel like, wants to reveal to us and show us from this wonderful example of Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel chapter 6. This is actually the last of Daniel and his friends kind of doing battle in Babylon, these narratives found in chapters 1 through 6. The rest of the book, chapters 7 through 12, is actually prophecy. Daniel's going to be having these visions, kind of like John in the book of Revelation, except in the Old Testament. He's going to be having these visions of prophecy, this apocalyptic literature for those last several chapters. So we're gonna stay away from that. Let Jerry maybe handle that one day. But I'm gonna focus one more time this morning on how we can develop the habit of courage in our lives as followers of Christ. How can we stand out in Babylon, in the world that we live in? How can we be that salt and light that Jesus called us to? How can we stand strong and thrive no matter what life throws at us? See, we see Daniel thriving no matter what life throws at him, no matter what the situation or circumstance. You know, I'm a little sad this series is actually over, and I hope that it has helped many of us with our perspective on life's difficulties. That really, according to the New Testament, even Jesus himself, we shouldn't be surprised when we have troubles come into our lives, when we have these fiery trials that we have to walk through. And not only that, not only not be surprised, but actually begin to see these difficulties as opportunities to deepen our faith, to grow in our character and our endurance and our Christ-likeness. God is actually using everything that we're going through. I like how Ray said it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because for a lot of us, it's ugly, it's no fun, but he can even take that mess, that ugliness, and he can use it to grow us and shape us, make us more like his son Jesus. I want to show us today through this story that courage doesn't just magically appear in the moment, right? A lot of times we feel like we're in a situation we can somehow just muster up this courage out of thin air magically. But really, it doesn't happen that way. What I want to show you today is that courage is actually developed through a lifetime of small, consistent decisions. That's how it happens. That's where it comes from. Courage is actually a pattern that you program into your heart. Remember, for Daniel, this started all the way back at the age of 15. As a young man, as a teenager, when he resolved in his heart, when he purposed, when he decided, I'm going to make God my priority in this life. I'm going to do what he tells me to do no matter what. He's going to be my everything. I'm going to dedicate my life to him regardless of the outcome. And I'm going to keep saying this. Jordan said we sang that song and we keep repeating it. I'm going to keep saying this till I'm blue in the face. Our decisions are so important. Our decisions, just those simple, everyday decisions that we think don't make that much difference, actually are our life. We are who we are today because of those decisions. The direction of our life is actually determined by the quality of our decisions. I read that this week. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, that's who we are because of our decisions. We make decisions, and then our decisions make us. We're going to see today that Daniel's decisions as a young man actually set the pattern for the rest of his life. And so, young people, again, hear me. The decisions that Daniel made as a young man in his teenage years actually are setting the pattern for the rest of his life. I came across an illustration that I really like this week. You know, when you type something into Google and it auto-completes for you. How many of y'all think that's just annoying, right? Yeah, it just jumps. But here's the thing. We shouldn't blame Google because we're the ones that's actually telling Google what to do by our habits and our patterns. Google knows that we follow patterns, and so it auto-fills our search bar according to how we have trained it. The same thing is true with how you respond to adversity. Your heart auto-fills your response based on the patterns that you've established in your life. So think about it. What are your go-to responses? What are the patterns that you see in your life? The Greek philosopher Aristotle, who lived a couple of hundred years after Daniel, said, "Excellence is not an act, it's a habit." And I want to go so far as to say today that the same thing can be said about courage. Courage is not an act, it's a habit. It's developed over years and years of repeated patterns, small, everyday decisions. So with that in mind, let's pick up the story in Daniel chapter 6. 70 years, this is amazing, 70 years of captivity have now transpired. Babylon has been overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. You remember back in chapter 2, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had? That head of gold, which represented the kingdom of Babylon, has now been replaced by the chest and the shoulders of silver, who are the Medes and the Persians. King Darius of the Medes now sits on the throne. Nebuchadnezzar is long gone. He's died. He's out of the picture. Belshazzar, who was the current Babylonian king, he's been killed. And so there's a new guy, and he is on the throne. His name is Darius. I want us to notice today the names in these stories keep changing, but the spiritual challenge is still the same. Will Daniel remain faithful when the pressure is on? Believe it or not, Daniel is now well over 80 years old, still living in captivity. How many of y'all realized that in this story of Daniel in the lion's den, he's in his 80s? Like, I've heard this story my whole life, and I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if I knew, even as the preacher standing up here, that he was in his 80s when this happened, when he's thrown into the lion's den. This new king Darius, he's trying to bring continuity to his new government, stability, and so he's going to keep on his court a lot of Nebuchadnezzar's wise men, including Daniel. So let's pick up in Daniel 6, 1 through 3. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. Now, that's a word we probably don't know. It actually came from a different language, and that word means protectors of the realm. Isn't that kind of cool? So he's going to set up 120 protectors of the realm now that the Medes and Persians have taken over the Babylonian Empire, to be throughout the whole kingdom. Verse 2, and over those 120, over them, 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one. So he's one of these 3 guys, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Now, these guys are what do you think's happening among these 120 guys out in the kingdom? Well, there's corruption, there's bribery, there's skimming off the top, there's underhanded deals going on. And so these 3 guys are in charge of preventing rebellion and trying to squelch greed and corruption. Then I love verse 3. Listen to this. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials, and satraps. Why? Because an excellent spirit was in him. Other versions say an extraordinary spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Isn't this amazing? This is a whole new guy, yet he has risen to the top once again. Once again, we see that no matter what circumstance Daniel is in, he's standing out. He stays positive. He believes and trusts that God has a plan, and this actually creates opportunities for him over and over in his life. Now, can I point out again that Daniel is over 80? Let's keep that in mind. He's over 80 at this point. He has served his God faithfully for over 70 years now. Let's say since a young man, he's been following God. Surely now he's going to have a life of ease, right? I mean, doesn't he deserve it? He's in his 80s. Surely he's faced all the challenges that he'll have to face. Surely he's just going to ride off into the retirement sunset, right? Not even close. Not even close. And I hope we find a word in this for some of you today. If you are of a certain age here today, if you are seasoned, if you are among the seasoned among us, God is not done with you yet. That's a word for you. God is not done with you yet. In fact, for many of you, this chapter could be where you actually have the most to contribute, and I'll tell you why. Because you have the most time and the least financial need that you've ever had in your life. Think about that. For many of us, in this time of our life, this chapter of our life, we have the most time and the least financial need for us to invest in God's kingdom work. So how are you using your time? How are you investing your time and your talents and your treasure in the kingdom of God? I'm too old. I did my time. Let me share a few examples of people just doing amazing things in their 80s. At 85 years old, John Wesley. Do we know who John Wesley is? An English pastor and evangelist. He actually was the founder of Methodism, the Methodist Church. He was still traveling and still preaching up to 2 to 3 times a day at 85. Traveling and preaching 2 to 3 times a day. He's 85 years old. One of Wesley's most famous quotes was, this one blew me away. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Those are words to live by. At 67 years old, Michelangelo painted his Last Judgment, now one of his most famous paintings. It's unbelievable. At 71, he became chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica. At 87, I read Picasso is doing some of his best work. At age 84, the year that he died, Thomas Edison was still filing for new inventions at the patent office. I read about CrossFitters. I read about someone in their 90s who hiked up Mount Everest, people jumping out of airplanes. Remember Colonel Sanders, Harlan Sanders? He was 65 years old when he franchised Kentucky Fried Chicken. How about Caleb and Joshua from the book of Numbers? They were among those 12 spies that went into the land, the only ones that had faith. And because of the lack of faith, they spent 40 years in the wilderness. Now, they are finally going to enter into the promised land in the book of Joshua. Caleb is 85 years old. And you want to know what he says? This is what he tells Joshua. He says, give me the hill country where the cities are large and fortified, where the people are giants. I'm ready to take them on. He's 85. He's like, bring it. The Lord is with me. Give me the most difficult territory, because we're going to go in there and we're going to do with God's power what he's called us to do, what he wants us to do. At 85 years old. So I'm asking you today, what's your excuse? What's your excuse? Don't let anyone tell you that you're done. Who can you help? Who can you help? Who can you come alongside of and disciple and mentor and pour your wisdom into and help financially and serve? Where can you invest in the kingdom because you've got the time and the resources to do it? What's God calling you to do? So Daniel is in his 80s. He's still being used by God. He's still standing out. What makes him so different? Let's look in verse 4. The other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. See, this guy's making them look bad. So they're upset. We got to find some dirt on this guy. Listen to what it says. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. Here's the sentence. Listen, focus on this sentence. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Wow. Faithful, responsible, and completely trustworthy. He's honest, he's reliable, he's hardworking, he's not lazy or negligent. He had a good attitude, he didn't complain, he always went the extra mile. These exceptional qualities make Daniel stand out. Now, think about this. Daniel is in Babylon, he's working a secular job, and he continues to advance. He continues to advance. So don't miss this. Even non-Christians recognize an extraordinary worker. They recognize these qualities. It doesn't take much these days to stand out from the crowd, does it? Honesty, kindness, consistency, dependability goes a long way. So my question to you today is that how your boss would describe you? Is that how your coworkers would describe you? It doesn't take long for people to decide what kind of person you are, what kind of character that you have. It always comes out. And the king looks on and says, Daniel is head and shoulders above anyone else serving in my kingdom. I'm going to put him in charge. I like him so much. He's going to be second in charge to me over the entire Medo-Persian Empire. That sounds like a great day, doesn't it? Wow, that sounds like a wonderful day. But the reality is, these other administrators and officials are jealous, and they decide they're going to take this guy down. Like in any job, he has some haters. How many of y'all got some haters in your workplace? I think the lesson that we learned from last week is really taking a stand in Babylon, doing the right thing, is always going to make some people angry. It just is. Yeah, have you ever heard of the crab syndrome? This is something I kind of discovered this week. The crab mentality. So if you put crabs inside of a bucket and one brave little crab says, okay, I'm not staying in this bucket anymore, right? And he's going to start climbing out. You know what all of his buddies down in the bottom of that bucket do? They reach up, like they do, like crabs do, and they actually pull him right back down into the bucket. Every time, without fail. They reach up and pull him back down and say, basically, if I can't be free, you can't be free. Right? This is what's happening to Daniel. This is what's happening to him. He becomes a target. We've got to find some dirt on this guy. He's cramping their style because he's honest. He's hardworking. He's got integrity, unlike the rest of us. He's making us look bad. We've got to find some way to take him down. And have we learned yet that doing right is no guarantee everything will go right? This is just another example in the book of Daniel. Not every time you do right, everything's going to go right. Let me ask you this. What if your enemies decided to check you out the way these guys came after Daniel? They wanted to find some dirt on you. Not just what you say you believe, right? When you come to church on Sunday and we worship and we raise our hands, well, what does your life look like in Babylon? What would they uncover if they comb through your phone calls, your internet usage, your business deals, your financial records, your shopping habits? How about the way you treat your spouse, your children, your vocabulary at home? I'm sure you've heard this question before. If you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? The world may not know much about the Bible, but it surely can judge our character and conduct as believers. Our witness is so important. We've heard this before. Your life may be the only Bible that some people ever read. Your life. So what's the message that they're getting? Are they receiving mixed signals? Like Daniel, we need to live in a way that reflects what we say we believe. Our words and our actions need to line up. Now, as these guys are searching for some fault, some skeleton in the closet, all they find is character, integrity, and honesty. And the reason he's this way at 80 is because he made up his mind when he was 15, 16, 17 years old. He was consistent morally, relationally, and spiritually. So they give up. Finally, they give up, and they decide, you know what? Okay, we're never going to find a basis for charges against this guy. Verse 5, second part says, unless. We're never going to find a basis in his work, so we've got to change our strategy unless it has something to do with his faith, with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, should be thrown into the lion's den. They've got a plan. See what's happening? They actually are appealing to the king's ego, to his pride. I like how one writer put it. He said, these guys came and said, King Darius, we want to sponsor 30 days of you. 30 days of King Darius. Doesn't that sound amazing? It'll be great. We'll have bobbleheads and we'll have T-shirts and we might even throw in a few public executions just for good measure. But this is going to be all about you. We're going to hit pause on all other religions and we're going to reaffirm your authority. Everyone needs to learn to depend on you for everything. They need to see how amazing and all-sufficient, how godlike you are. So for 30 days, everybody is going to pray to and worship one person. Guess who that's going to be? You, King Darius. And oh, by the way, we want you to put this in writing. Issue a decree, put it in writing so that it can't be altered or repealed because this is a Medo-Persian law. Once something's in writing, it can't be revoked. How do you think the king felt about this idea? That sounds pretty good. The king is flattered. Wow, that sounds great. So in verse 9, it says, King Darius signed the law. Simply, all right, put it in front of me. He signs the law. Now, when Daniel learned what had happened, that this decree had been published, what do you think he did? How did he respond? I love this in verse 10. He went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to God. Now, if you want to know the secret to Daniel, his life, his success, his thriving, here it is. It's his consistency. It's this priority for relationship that he has with the Father. It's this habit. We've seen it over and over and over. Whenever Daniel's in trouble, whenever he feels threatened, who does he turn to? To the Father. He goes to the Father in prayer. He goes to God in prayer. This was as natural to him as breathing. So again, here's my question to you. What is your instinct when trouble comes? What's your instinct? When you've been hurt in your marriage, when your spouse is not treating you fairly, it's just not getting any better, what do? What's your instinct when you feel threatened? When you feel like You're being pressured at your job to do the wrong thing, to conform. Or you're being treated unfairly by your boss or your colleagues. Or maybe when a friend or a boyfriend or girlfriend is pressuring you to do the wrong thing. What's your response? When you're certain that doing the wrong thing is going to cost you, what do? In these moments, we actually discover what is most important to us. We discover what and who we're most committed to. And actually, we discover whether or not our faith and our integrity is disposable. I read that this week our response in these situations usually fits into one of four categories. Let's see if any of this rings true in your life today. For some of us, our response is panic. When we're up against the wall, we panic, right? You get scared and you cave in. Well, all my friends are doing it. I'm going to be an outcast if I don't. I really don't have a choice if I want to survive in Babylon. So I panic and I just cave. I compromise. I've got a verse for you today if this is you. It's from 1 Corinthians 10:13. Paul reminds the Corinthian church, but remember this. The wrong desires that come into your life aren't anything new and different. Many others have faced exactly the same problems before you. And no temptation is irresistible. Don't we like to think, I just could not resist. Well, here's the truth. No temptation is irresistible. You can trust God to keep the temptation from becoming so strong that you can't stand up against it. For he has promised this and will do what he says. He will show you how to escape temptation's power so that you can bear up patiently against it. God will always provide a way of escape. He says he'll always supply you with the strength, the wisdom, the ability to do the right thing if you'll just trust him. If you'll trust him. See, it's not just about faith up here, it's faith out there in real life. Am I going to trust him in this situation? Am I going to seek him? I'm not going to panic. I'm going to do what I know is right according to his word. I'm going to leave the rest to him. A second common response to this kind of pressure is pride, right? Something comes in, I can handle this. I can do this. I should be able to overcome this. Now, does that sound like humble dependence on God or self-sufficiency? Well, you can't beat me. You're not going to beat me. I can find all I need in myself. You want to know the sign that your heart is running proud, the indicator light that comes on? It's prayerlessness. It's prayerlessness. You don't pray consistently because you're convinced that if you reach down deep enough, you should be able to find the resources to overcome. But hear me today, at some point that's going to fail you. Listen to even King Nebuchadnezzar's words at the end of chapter 4. He says, he, the king of heaven, knows how to turn a proud person into a humble man or woman. This is Nebuchadnezzar recognizing that God, the king of heaven, can turn a proud person humble real quick. Are you there today? In a situation where you just can't overcome. You've tried everything in your own power and you can't overcome. Are you overwhelmed by the challenges of parenting or your marriage? Are you financially underwater? This is your opportunity to actually turn towards God in faith and trust. But are you willing to take those steps? What's your instinct when trouble comes? Panic, pride? How about preemptive strike? Preemptive strike. I will protect myself by fighting. Guess what? You hurt me, I'll hurt you back. You want to play dirty? I'll play even dirtier. Isn't that what the world teaches us? When Daniel found out about this law, you know what he could have done? He could have went behind these guys. You know what? They want to play this way. I can engineer some political trick. I can take every one of these guys down. Some of you are this way in your marriage. The way I'll keep you from hurting me is by making it clear that if you do, I'm going to hurt you back, and you don't want to go there. Panic, pride, preemptive strike, and then there's Daniel's response, prayer. What we see over and over and over in his life. But even here, Daniel has options. Let's think about it. I've been doing this for 80 years now. I can just take the next 30 days off, right? And we're okay, right? Okay, God? If I just take the next 30 days off? Or he could have faked it. He could have just prayed silently, kept the windows shut. Why open the windows? You know, it's kind of warm outside. I'll just close the windows. Are you praying? Nope. I'm just meditating. I just got my eyes closed. But what does he do? Verse 10. Let's read it again. He went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, with the windows open toward Jerusalem. See, Jerusalem is not even there anymore. It had been destroyed 70 years earlier, but this just shows the faith that Daniel still has in God. God, we've been exiles for 70 years, but I trust you. You promised us. You told us through the prophet Jeremiah, you're going to bring us out of this, and you're going to restore everything. So I'm still going to face Jerusalem, and I'm going to trust you at your word, and I'm going to continue to pray to you as I always have my entire life. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. What audacious faith. This is Daniel's default. What's yours? What's yours? What autofills in the search bar of your heart when hard times come? You're training yourself in your response. That evening, Daniel prayed as peacefully as he ever had every other one. He comes into the throne room of the one true God. And he humbles himself. He kneels before the creator and sustainer of the universe. He doesn't announce his prayers to make a public show. Just like when he didn't eat the food, he didn't say, hey, look at us, we're not eating the food. He didn't announce it. He just quietly, by faith, did what he had always done. What was right, what God wanted him to do. I'm a child of God, therefore I will seek him. I need to hear his voice. I need his strength, his help. I need him to shoulder the weight of my problems. This relationship is my lifeline. And just like any other relationship, it requires priority and effort. And Daniel kept it a priority. I need this conversation, this relationship. For 80 years, Daniel had been faithful to God. God had been faithful to Daniel, so no matter what, Daniel was going to be faithful to God. Now, I want us to notice that Daniel has a place and a practice, a plan, right? I've been doing this every day, 3 times a day. I've got a plan and I've got a place. Now think about it. If you don't have a plan, we've heard this before, you're actually planning to fail if you don't have a plan. If there's no predetermined plan of how you want to grow in intimacy with God, I can almost guarantee you that you are not growing in intimacy with God. So what is the plan? Notice also how he prayed. He knelt before God in prayer. How did he have the strength to stand strong? How could he stand before men? It was because he had knelt before God. He had knelt in humility and surrender and dependence day after day after day before God. You know where his courage came from? Right here, in this prayer closet, in this relationship. So Daniel prays, and of course the other officials see it. It's a setup. It's a trap. It's a setup, and so they run to the king. They can barely contain their excitement. They go straight to the king, remind him about his law. Let's pick up in verses 12 and 13. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. Yes, the king replied. That decision stands. It's an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. Then they told the king, that man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. Now, unlike Nebuchadnezzar, King Darius is not furious. He's actually devastated. Why? Because he likes Daniel. Everybody likes Daniel. He's angry because he realizes he was tricked. These guys have gotten the best of him. He finally has one guy who he can trust, and now he has essentially signed his death warrant. His conscience torments him all throughout the day because he knows the danger he's put Daniel in. So he spends all day up until sundown looking for some loophole, looking for a way to get out of this predicament, but he can't because the document has already been signed. Verse 16, so at last the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. Now I want us to think about this. Even after a life of faithfulness, consistency, standing strong in his faith, standing out, the Lord allows him to face the toughest trial of his life in his 80s by letting him be thrown into this den full of lions. Why? Why would he do that? I mean, Daniel has been faithful. Why would God allow him in his 80s to face his toughest trial yet? I want to go back to something we said last week. Sometimes God allows things that we don't understand to accomplish something greater than we could ever imagine. That's a tough statement, but it's the truth. Sometimes God allows things we don't understand to accomplish something greater than we could ever imagine. And we've got to trust, in these times, we've got to trust, okay, God, this is horrible. This is not good. This is ugly. This is messy. But I believe that nothing can separate me from your love. And that you're going to work all things, even this ugliness, you're going to work all things together for my good and for your glory. See, our faithfulness doesn't guarantee a trial-free life, but God, we learned last week, will always be with us. He'll never leave us or forsake us. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, Darius isn't angry with Daniel. He actually regrets putting him in the lion's den. He wants to rescue him. So Darius says to Daniel, as this stone is being placed over the entrance to the den of lions in verse 16, he says, may your God, listen to this, I love this phrase, whom you serve so faithfully. See, even this guy recognizes it. Who you serve so faithfully. I'm rooting for you, Daniel. I'm actually rooting for your God to save you. I'm sorry I have to do this. May he save you. Understand that Daniel is in a den full of real lions. Lions that were purposefully starved to be used as executioners. This is as bad as it gets. No one has ever gotten out alive. This is the climax. If this were a movie, this is where all the action's going to take place in this lion's den. But guess what? The camera pans away from the lion's den to the king's palace. But wait a minute, I want to know what's going on over here in the lion's den. Cut back over here. But he doesn't. He stays over here at the king's palace. Verse 18. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment. No Netflix, no Xbox, no music or food or dancing. And it says he couldn't sleep at all that night. He can't sleep at all. And verse 19, very early the next morning, at the first light, I'm just waiting for the first sign of the sun to rise. And Darius takes off. King Darius takes off. The king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. And when he got there, he called out in anguish, hoping for the best, probably believing the worst, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, here it is again, whom you serve so faithfully, he's done it his whole life, was he able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, probably paused a minute just to let the king stew for a minute. Long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths. Just like in the fiery furnace, the Lord didn't prevent this trial, but guess where the Lord was? Right there with him in the midst of that trial. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. Verse 23 says, the king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. Now the question for us is, when did Daniel learn to trust God? It wasn't in that lion's den. That's where he had to practice it. You know where he learned to trust God? Day after day after day on his knees, in relationship with the Father, through a lifetime of small, consistent decisions, through small, everyday acts of faithful obedience. He had consistently sought after the heart of God, and then he lived out that faith. That's the secret to his success. So why is it that some of us are so inconsistent with our relationship with God? If that's the secret, why are so many of us so inconsistent? Especially with the understanding that the devil himself is like a roaring lion, always on the prowl, looking for someone to devour. He's seeking marriages and families and young people, anyone and everyone that he can devour. You want to know why Daniel was unshakable? Because of the choices that he made. His choices. He chose obedience to God over opportunities in the world. He chose faithfulness to God over the favor of the king. He chose devotion to God over the decree of the king. He chose bowing before God over bowing before his enemies. He chose a faithful testimony over fleeting treasures, power, pleasure, popularity, and wealth. He chose commitment over compromise. He chose character over comfort. He chose love even over life itself. I don't have to be afraid of those who kill the body because I have a God who can preserve the soul. And even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I won't be afraid. You know what? Because just beyond this valley is the Father's house, is eternity. And he's going to walk with me there. I don't have to fear anything or be afraid. Do we realize how vastly different the church would be today if we had the same kind of commitment to the things of God as Daniel does, as Daniel did? We allow everything in the world to come between us and our faithfulness to the Lord. Why do we do that? The point of Daniel's story is this: God honors our faithfulness, our faith. This is how the world discovers who he is. We may not face a den of lions, but we're sure to face times of sickness and sorrow, distress, persecution, hardship, even death. And through it all, the Lord simply asks of us that we would remain faithful to him. We would trust that his grace is sufficient. What's the one sentence that every child of God wants to hear on that last day? Well done, good and faithful servant. Come into the joy. Come and experience the joy that is mine along with me. Well done, faithful servant. See, I can be a lot of things. I can't be perfect, but I can choose faithfulness. I can choose to do always what I know is right and best. If it is to live, to live. If it is to die, to die. In either case, we have the victory. My life is in God's hands. All my days are written in His book. To live is Christ, and to die is actually gain. Daniel's life was consistent from start to finish. He was a man of honor, courage, virtue, commitment, integrity. He utterly fulfills the calling that God placed on his life. His primary concern was being faithful. See, that's actually the win. That's the win. Doing what God wanted him to do. Doesn't that sound like Jesus? That sounds like Jesus to me. Jesus said, I have come down from heaven not to do my will. This isn't about me. I've come to do the will of the one who sent me. That was Jesus' entire life. That's the win by fulfilling the Father's will and His purpose. You obey God and you leave the outcome to Him. If you do that, you've won. But you've got to resolve to do that. You've got to make up your mind. You've got a purpose in your heart. Decide in advance that your primary concern is faithfulness to Him no matter what. You got to be willing, as Jesus said, to deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow Him. So how are you engaging your faith every day? How are you learning to trust God as you put Jesus' words into practice? You need a plan. You need a small group. You need a discipleship group. We have those here in our church. I challenge you to start a daily prayer time. Make a plan, have a place and a practice, and stick to it for 30 days. Develop a new habit. See what God can do as you seek Him, as you trust Him. Let me pray for you today.